Tonight, we're stepping into some of the most unsettling corners of the UFO world. Stories that linger not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they refuse to let go. Each of these stories sits at a crossroads between the ordinary and the impossible. And whether you believe in extraterrestrial visitors or think there's a more grounded explanation, one thing is certain: these encounters leave a mark. So settle in. Let's take a closer look at what happens when the sky opens, the quiet breaks, and the world suddenly becomes a much stranger place. I want to take you back to an evening in October of 2003, an evening my wife and I still talk about more than 20 years later. It was around 6 o'clock, maybe just after. We were both on a screened-in porch at our home in Westerville, Ohio, a quiet suburb just northeast of Columbus. Our porch faces east, overlooking a small creek that runs behind the house, with a decent-sized retaining pond nearby. Off in the distance, a few miles south, is Port Columbus International Airport, and to the east, not far as the crow flies, lies Hoover Reservoir, which covers a huge stretch of land. So we're sitting out there, enjoying the evening like we always do, when my wife notices something in the southeast sky. At first, it just looked like a bright point of light. Nothing remarkable. Could have been sunlight catching a plane. Could have been Venus. Could have even been a communication satellite hanging in the right place. I didn't think much of it at all. But after a few minutes, my wife says, "It hasn't moved." And that's when I started paying attention. The light was just hanging there. Not drifting, not rising, not descending. Absolutely still. Curiosity got the better of me, so I went inside and grabbed my 7x50 field glasses. Binoculars with a wide field of view and good clarity. I've used them plenty of times, so I knew I'd be able to get a clean look. The moment I focused in on that thing, I felt something I still can't quite describe. A mix of disbelief, excitement, confusion, maybe even fear. What I was looking at was not a satellite. It wasn't an airplane. It wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't a blimp heading down to Ohio State for a football game. It wasn't birds. It wasn't a weather balloon. And it certainly wasn't swamp gas. This was something else entirely. The object was shaped like a rectangle, but not a perfect one. The top edges were slightly rounded, as if the corners had been smoothed out. The body of the object looked dark, except where the late-day sunlight glinted off its surface. The edges looked fuzzy, not crisp or metallic, almost as if the light was scattering or reflecting off something around it. It didn't look like solid metal, more like something darker that just wasn't catching the sun. Based on the size of the figure inside, yes, inside, I estimate the object had to be around 50 to 60 feet across and maybe 10 feet tall. A huge rectangular box floating silently in the sky. And the windows. There were 5 tall rectangular windows, evenly spaced across the side facing us. They took up a large portion of the object's visible surface. Behind those windows was a soft yellow light, warm, steady, not flickering, not like any aircraft lighting I'd ever seen. And standing inside, plain as day through the binoculars, was a person. A man. He wasn't heavy set, he looked slender. He was wearing what appeared to be a white or very light-colored one-piece suit, covering him from the neck down to his wrists and ankles. No gloves, no hat, no helmet, no obvious equipment on him, just this clean, seamless outfit. I couldn't make out facial features or hair. The windows were bright and backlit, so his face was more of a silhouette, but the outline of his body was unmistakable. At one point, only once over the entire time we watched, he moved, a step or two to his left, slow, deliberate, like he was responding to something or someone on that side, though the windows didn't extend far enough for us to see anything beyond him. He raised his left arm and rested it on what looked like a cabinet, the only visible piece of interior equipment. It reached up to his shoulder, and he placed his hand on it casually, like someone leaning on a filing cabinet while having a conversation. Meanwhile, the object itself stayed completely still. No drifting with the wind, no sound, nothing to indicate propulsion, no wings, no rotors, no exhaust, no lights on the exterior. Just a massive, silent rectangle with glowing windows, hanging in place. My wife and I watched it for around 40 minutes. We kept checking, stepping away, coming back, thinking maybe it would leave or move or reveal something more, but it didn't. It stayed right where it was. Eventually, the light began to fade, and the object, still reflecting the last of the sun, began to blend into the evening sky. We finally went inside, still talking about what we had seen. But the story wasn't over. When the next afternoon rolled around, we looked again, and there it was. The same object in the same place, same orientation, same silent presence in the sky. Another day, another sighting. That's when I decided to call a local TV station, WBNS Channel 10 in Columbus. I told the woman on the phone what we were seeing, and she gave me a short answer I can barely remember. Something polite but dismissive. And that was the end of that. No follow-up, no report on the air, nothing in the paper, no one knocking on our door. As far as we could tell, nobody else said a word about it, which still baffles me because this wasn't subtle. This was large, bright, obvious, and it was there 2 days in a row. My wife and I were both lifelong educators, not prone to exaggeration. We'd read about UFOs before, but neither of us had ever expected to see anything ourselves, not like this, and after all these years, I still can't explain it. A rectangular craft, 50 to 60 feet wide, 5 tall glowing windows, a slender figure inside wearing a white one-piece suit, and not a sound, not a movement, not a hint of what it truly was. And after those 2 evenings, it was gone, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I know what I saw. My wife knows what she saw, but I still have no idea what it was. And I suppose that's what stays with you the longest. The unanswered questions hanging there in your mind. Just like that silent rectangle hung in the southeastern sky over Westerville, Ohio. It was a calm October night in 1967 when something extraordinary lit up the skies over the small fishing village of Shag, Harbour, Nova Scotia. What began as a string of strange lights crossing the stars ended with a government investigation that remains, to this day, officially unexplained. This is the story of what witnesses called the crash that never left a trace. Just after 11 p.m. on October 4th, dozens of people along the south shore of Nova Scotia spotted it, a row of glowing orange lights moving low over the ocean. At first, many thought it was a plane in trouble. The lights descended fast, tilted at an angle, and then silently plunged toward the water. Moments later, there was a flash, followed by a deep whoosh, and then darkness. But a faint glow remained on the surface of the water, a strange yellowish light floating just offshore. Locals immediately called authorities, fearing a plane had gone down. Within minutes, the RCMP arrived at the shoreline. They could see the light too, steady, golden, hovering just beneath the waves. Rescue boats launched into the dark, expecting to find survivors or wreckage. But when they reached the site, there was nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no sound. Only the lingering light beneath the water. When daylight came, divers were brought in from the Canadian Navy. They searched the seabed for days. Not a single piece of metal, no human remains, absolutely nothing. At first, officials believed it had to be an aircraft, but every commercial and military plane was accounted for. Nothing had been reported missing. That's when the story took an even stranger turn. Some military divers later claimed that while the search was ongoing, they tracked 2 unidentified objects on sonar, resting on the ocean floor near Kilburn, a small naval base up the coast. For nearly a week, ships surrounded the area. Then, According to those same accounts, the object suddenly began to move, slipping silently away into deeper water, heading toward the open Atlantic. And just like that, the operation ended. The lights were gone. The files went quiet. The Canadian government listed the case simply as UFO unknown. No wreckage, no explanation, no logical way to dismiss it as a hoax. Even the RCMP officers who were there admitted publicly that what they saw couldn't be explained. Witnesses have held their stories for decades. Fishermen, teenagers, even police. They all described the same thing: bright orange lights, a gentle descent, and that eerie glow beneath the waves. Over the years, Shag Harbour has become one of the most credible UFO cases ever recorded. A mass sighting with official documentation, military involvement, and no rational conclusion. Was it a downed experimental craft? A Cold War secret gone wrong? Or something from far beyond our understanding? Whatever it was, the sea of Shag Harbour swallowed it whole, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that's never faded. To this day, the official government record still reads, "Object of unknown origin, seen to enter the water, no debris recovered." And maybe that's all we were ever meant to know. It began, as so many abduction stories do, not with a bright light in the sky, but with a feeling. Stephen Kilburn was an ordinary man, living an ordinary life. He had no interest in UFOs, no history of strange experiences, but each time he drove a certain stretch of highway between Frederick and Baltimore, Maryland, something inside him twisted with unease. His hands would tighten on the steering wheel, and an unexplainable dread would rise in his chest. There was nothing visibly wrong with the road, just a stretch of rural highway bordered by trees and wire fencing. Yet, every time he passed that place, he felt a quiet panic. For years, Kilburn couldn't explain why. He told himself it was stress, or maybe a trick of the mind. But the feeling never faded. It deepened, until one day he decided to talk to someone about it. That decision led him to artist-turned-researcher Bud Hopkins, whose 1981 book, Missing Time, would become a cornerstone of modern abduction research. Hopkins listened carefully to Kilburn's story, the nameless fear, the sense that something had happened on that road, something he could almost remember, but not quite. Hopkins believed that suppressed memories often hid beneath such gaps in time, what he called missing time. To uncover them, he arranged for Kilburn to undergo a series of hypnotic regression sessions with a licensed hypnotherapist. What followed would become one of the most detailed and haunting accounts in Hopkins' files. During the first regression, in the spring of 1978, Kilburn's voice trembled as fragments of the buried night began to surface. He was driving home late. The road was quiet, the air still. Then came the sensation, that tightening in the chest, followed by an overwhelming need to pull over. He couldn't say why, only that he had to stop. He remembered stepping out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes, the pale wooden fence ahead. Then something touched his shoulder. "I felt a clamp," he said. "It hurt. I couldn't move." A wave of panic set in. He sensed movement behind him. He saw shapes, figures, but not like any people he had ever seen. Their skin was chalk white, their faces smooth and almost featureless. No hair, no emotion. The texture of their skin wasn't like flesh at all, more like wax or putty. He felt them handling something, preparing for something. A light grew brighter, washing over him until the world seemed to dissolve. That was the last conscious memory before darkness swallowed everything. Hopkins stopped the session there, unsettled but intrigued. What Kilburn described matched elements from other cases he'd investigated: paralysis, light, pale beings, and total memory loss afterward. A second regression was scheduled several months later. In that later session, Kilburn's voice deepened. He described driving uphill when a bright light appeared above the trees. The car's dashboard clock flickered, then went dark. His body grew heavy, his mind foggy, as though gravity itself had shifted. The car jerked to the right, he whispered, like a magnet pulled it. Then he was outside again, staring at a luminous object resting near the fence. He said it wasn't a conventional craft. No seams, no wings, no sound. It glowed softly, like metal that emitted its own light. He felt himself drawn toward it. Whether he walked or was carried, he couldn't tell. The next memory placed him inside a circular room that seemed alive with light. Walls curved and seamless, glowing from within. He was lying on a table that rose smoothly from the floor, as though it had grown there. A band or device was lowered onto his head. He felt a sharp pain in his back, a needle or something like it. Then the beings, perhaps 3 or 4 of them, moved silently around him. Their touch was cold and clinical. They communicated without speech, sending thoughts directly into his mind. He was told to roll onto his back, then his side, then his front. Each time he obeyed, his body responded as if controlled by another will. "I can't move," he said during the session. "I'm awake, but I can't move." The procedure lasted minutes, maybe hours. He couldn't tell. When it ended, he was filled with an odd mixture of calm and exhaustion, as though sedated yet intensely aware. The last image he recalled was of the figures standing over him, their faces lit from below by the glow of the room. One of them seemed to be watching him with a kind of detached curiosity, the way a scientist might observe a specimen. Then came the fading light and the feeling of falling. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the driver's seat of his car, parked by the fence. The clock on the dashboard read nearly an hour later than it should have. He turned the key, started the engine, and drove home, numb, confused, and with no memory of what had occurred. Under hypnosis, Kilburn broke down more than once. He said things like, "I'm not supposed to remember," and "they don't want me to know." For Bud Hopkins, these statements were central. He saw in Kilburn's account the core features of what he believed to be genuine abduction: paralysis, medical examination, telepathic control, and suppressed memory. Hopkins also noted Kilburn's recurring dread of the road as a physical manifestation of trauma, his body remembering what his mind could not. To Hopkins, the case was evidence that the abduction phenomenon was not imaginary but systemic, repeated across ordinary people, each reporting similar details with no contact between them. He considered Kilburn's experience one of his most detailed and credible examples. Yet, as compelling as the story is, it remains impossible to verify. There were no witnesses to the event, no physical traces left behind. What we have are memories, vivid, emotional, and deeply personal, but memories nonetheless. Critics of regression therapy argue that hypnosis can suggest or even create experiences rather than recover them. They note that abductees often come to hypnosis already exposed to UFO imagery in the media, potentially shaping what surfaces under suggestion. But to Stephen Kilburn, the experience was real. The fear was real. The dread he felt on that lonely road could not be reasoned away. In the years that followed, he avoided that stretch of highway whenever he could. He described recurring dreams of bright rooms, featureless faces, and the sound of voices that weren't voices at all. Hopkins would go on to publish his account in Missing Time, positioning Kilburn's story as a cornerstone case, a window into a hidden world of human encounters with non-human intelligences. Whether these were beings from another planet, another dimension, or the depths of the human subconscious remains a question Hopkins could never answer. What lingers is not proof, but presence, that strange intersection of fear and wonder that defines the abduction mystery. Stephen Kilburn's story stands as a reminder that for every bright light reported in the sky, there's often a shadow cast on the ground below, and in that shadow, a human being trying to understand what happened to them. Perhaps that's what lingers most in these stories, not the presence of the unknown, but the people left in its wake, holding on to scattered memories and the quiet certainty that something brushed against their lives and changed them forever. In the summer of 1566, the people of Basel, Switzerland, awoke to what they believed might be a sign from heaven, or a warning of something far more unsettling. It was a quiet August morning, the kind that usually passed without incident, but at sunrise, the sky above the city erupted into a spectacle so bizarre, so otherworldly, that it was preserved in the town's official gazette and carved into woodcuts that survived to this day. This is the story of the Basel Celestial Battle, a mass witness phenomenon involving dozens of dark spheres that seem to wage war in the sky. Mid-16th century Europe was a place of tension and transformation. The Protestant Reformation had fractured religious unity. Strange comets were often interpreted as omens, and unexplained celestial events were taken very seriously. Basel, a respected center of printing and scholarship, placed great importance on documenting unusual phenomena. So when the citizens witnessed something extraordinary in the sky, it was not dismissed. It was written down meticulously. According to surviving records, the event began shortly after dawn on August 7, 1566. Dozens of townspeople reported seeing large, dark spheres drifting high above Basel. The objects were described as almost black in color, perfectly round, and moving with a strange, deliberate motion that did not resemble birds, clouds, or any known atmospheric phenomenon at the time. These weren't subtle glimmers or strange lights. They were solid shapes, visible to everyone who looked upward. The primary account comes from Samuel Cocceius, a local student of theology and the liberal arts who wrote for the city's newspaper. His description is vivid, almost cinematic. At the time when the sun rose, one saw many large black balls which moved at high speed in the air toward the sun, then made half turns, crashing into one another as if fighting in a battle. A great number of them became red and fiery, and thereafter were consumed and vanished. According to Cocceius, this display went on for several hours. Witnesses said the objects changed direction sharply, something no known natural object could do. They also appeared to strike one another as though intentionally engaged in conflict. After these impacts, many spheres glowed red, as if heated from within, then dissolved or disintegrated into nothing. If Cocceius had been the only witness, the story might have faded into folklore, but this was a multi-witness event, documented in an era when the printing press made such reports hard to suppress or distort. Interestingly, Basel had already experienced a strange aerial phenomenon just days earlier. On July 27, 1566, the sky reportedly filled with a blood-red glow, a disc-shaped object or massive sun halo, depending on interpretation, which many took as important. When the sky battle followed shortly after, citizens believed the two events were connected. Today, researchers view them as complementary parts of the same mystery. Over the centuries, historians and investigators have proposed many explanations. Atmospheric optics. Some suggest rare atmospheric reflections of the rising sun. However, optical phenomena do not accelerate, collide, or turn sharply. Migratory birds or insects. Another theory claims flocks of birds silhouetted against the sunrise could appear spherical, but birds don't vanish in fiery flashes, nor do they collide in coordinated patterns. Early astronomical event misinterpreted. Fireballs or meteor fragments, possibly, but meteors don't slow down, reverse direction, or remain visible for hours. Religious or symbolic interpretation. Some historians believe the event was viewed through a highly symbolic lens, perhaps exaggerated to warn citizens of political division. Yet this argument fails to explain why independent printers created woodcuts showing nearly identical details. Modern researchers note that the description matches certain types of multi-object UFO sightings: spherical craft, coordinated flight, brightening or glowing, and sudden disappearance. Though the term UFO didn't exist in 1566, the behaviors observed are difficult to reconcile with natural explanations. One of the most striking elements of the Basel case is the surviving woodcut illustration, created shortly after the event. It shows dozens of spheres suspended over the city, some dark, some glowing, arranged in chaotic motion. Woodcuts in this era were not works of fantasy, but intended records of events, especially for newspapers and public announcements. The Basel woodcut stands as one of the earliest known visual depictions of what would today be considered an aerial anomaly. While centuries have passed, the event remains one of the most compelling mass witness UFO sightings in history. It occurred long before airplanes, satellites, drones, or science fiction concepts that might influence interpretation. Witnesses had no vocabulary for aliens or extraterrestrial craft. They described what they saw: spheres moving with purpose, interacting with each other, glowing red, and disappearing. To this day, the Basel phenomenon is included in studies of pre-modern UFO sightings and remains unexplained. Nearly 500 years later, the question remains: what did the people of Basel witness that morning? It was a quiet night on September 19th, 1961. The small town of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, lay under a clear sky, the stars shimmering above as if watching over the world below. On this night, two ordinary people, Betty and Barney Hill, would experience an event that would change their lives forever and leave one of the most famous UFO abduction cases in history. Barney Hill, a postal worker, and his wife Betty, a social worker, were driving back home after a vacation in Canada. The night was calm, the road nearly empty, and the couple were discussing their trip, enjoying the familiar comfort of each other's company. But little did they know, something extraordinary awaited them on the lonely roads of New Hampshire. As they drove along Route 3, just past the town of Lincoln, Barney noticed something unusual in the sky. At first, he thought it was a plane or a star, but the object's movement was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a bright, glowing light descending slowly, then hovering, then moving erratically. "Look at that, Betty," Barney said, squinting through the windshield. "What is that?" Betty leaned forward, shielding her eyes from the glare. The object was enormous, larger than any plane, and it emitted a strange pulsating glow. It was perfectly circular like a disc, and it seemed to be following them. The couple tried to maintain their composure, but fear was beginning to creep in. Barney turned on the car's headlights, thinking perhaps it would reveal the object more clearly. The light reflected off the craft, revealing a metallic surface that shimmered unnaturally. As they continued down the road, the UFO moved closer. Barney instinctively slowed the car, but no matter what they did, the object remained overhead. It was silent, yet its presence was overwhelming, almost magnetic. Betty described seeing windows or portholes along the craft, with humanoid figures inside. The beings seemed to be observing them, though the sight was fleeting. Barney, normally skeptical, felt a deep, unshakable sense that this was real. Something was happening to them that defied explanation. Then, suddenly, time seemed to blur. Barney glanced at his watch, only to realize that hours had passed in what felt like minutes. The couple felt disorientated, their memories hazy, their sense of direction lost. What followed was even stranger. Both Betty and Barney later recalled, or perhaps recovered through hypnosis, that they were aboard the craft. They described being lifted into the air, engulfed in a bright light, then moving into a large room inside the UFO. Inside, they encountered beings unlike anything they had seen on Earth. Small, gray-skinned creatures with large, dark eyes observed them closely, performing examinations that were clinical, precise, and deeply unsettling. Barney remembered instruments that emitted soft hums and glowing lights, probing his body. Betty was separated, but also examined, and both experienced an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Despite the fear, they were never physically harmed. The beings seemed interested in their reactions, communicating perhaps telepathically, observing, recording, but never showing overt aggression. The experience was surreal, almost dreamlike, but the terror was real. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Betty and Barney found themselves back in their car, on the familiar roads of New Hampshire. The night air was cool, the stars once again twinkling peacefully, yet something had shifted inside them. Time had passed, hours they could not account for, and a lingering unease settled over them. In the days and weeks that followed, the Hills struggled to reconcile what had happened. They experienced vivid dreams, disturbing flashbacks, and a persistent anxiety that refused to fade. Friends and family were skeptical, dismissing their story as stress, fatigue, or imagination, but the Hills knew what they had seen. Several months later, seeking answers, Betty and Barney underwent hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon, a prominent psychiatrist experienced in dealing with unusual psychological cases. Under hypnosis, they both recounted the events in chilling detail. Barney described the UFO, the beings, and the medical examinations. Betty recalled similar experiences, though her memories included a remarkable detail, a star map shown to her by the extraterrestrials. The map depicted a section of the sky that, when later analyzed by astronomers, appeared to correspond with the Zeta Reticuli star system. The hypnosis sessions revealed not only the abduction itself, but the profound psychological impact it had on the couple. The memories were vivid, terrifying, and consistent, yet fragmented, like trying to recall a dream after waking. The Hills story shocked the world. It was the first widely publicized case of alleged alien abduction, and it ignited a wave of interest, skepticism, and investigation. UFO researchers studied their accounts extensively, and the Zeta Reticuli star map became a central point of fascination. Barney and Betty lived with the memory for the rest of their lives, often recounting their experience in interviews, documentaries, and books. Their story influenced countless other abduction reports, forming the template for much of what we now recognize as the modern alien abduction narrative. Though skeptics questioned their account, the Hill case remains one of the most compelling and detailed stories of its kind. It's a reminder that the universe may be far stranger than we imagine, and that sometimes even ordinary people can encounter the extraordinary. Tonight, when you look up at the stars, consider the possibility that we are not alone. Consider that somewhere out there, intelligent beings may be watching, observing, or even reaching out. And remember the story of Betty and Barney Hill, a tale that continues to challenge our understanding of reality, the unknown, and the mysteries that lie beyond our world. As different as these encounters are, they all share a familiar thread, the moment when ordinary life falters and something unexplainable steps into view. We may never know exactly what these witnesses saw or why these events unfolded the way they did, but their stories continue to echo, not because they demand belief, but because they remind us of how vast and mysterious our world still is. Thank you for joining me tonight, and if you've had your own strange encounter, no matter how small or how strange, you're not alone. There's always room for one more story in the dark. Until next time, stay curious Stay open and keep watching the skies.